Space is not completely silent. Are there sounds we can't hear? In space, no one can hear you scream. You've probably heard this sentence dozens of times before. In movies, documentaries, and even at school, we were taught that space is completely silent. But what if I told you that this is actually incomplete information? What if space isn't as silent as we think? Today, we are going to explore how our ears deceive us. Let's start with a small experiment. Imagine you have a large bell in your hand. You ring it with all your might. If you were on Earth, even people down the street would hear the sound. Now imagine taking that same bell and ringing it in the middle of space. What would happen? Nothing. At least your ear wouldn't hear a thing. But wait, the reason for this isn't that space is silent. What we call sound is actually composed of invisible vibrations. When you speak, your vocal cords vibrate the air. These vibrations are passed on to millions of molecules in the air like dominoes, and eventually they reach your ear. Your ear then interprets these vibrations as sound. The professor makes a few taps on the tablet in his hand. Two drawings appear side by side on the screen. In one, there is Earth, surrounded by billions of tiny blue dots, meaning air molecules. In the other, an astronaut standing alone in the middle of space. Do you see the difference? He asks, on Earth, there are billions of tiny carriers for sound to travel on. In space, there are almost none. Here is the critical point right there. Most people say, space is silent. Actually, the correct sentence is, there is not enough matter in space for sound to travel through. These two things may seem the same, but there is a massive difference between them. To understand this better, think of an empty swimming pool. If there is no water in the pool, you cannot create a wave. But that doesn't mean the concept of creating a wave has vanished. It's just that the medium to carry the wave is missing. The situation in space is exactly like this. That is why, even if two astronauts were drifting side by side and shouted at each other outside their helmets, they wouldn't hear a thing. Sound waves cannot find air and cannot travel even a few centimeters. The professor shakes his head as if he is about to say, so, space really is silent. Then he suddenly smiles. This is exactly where everyone is mistaken. Because the truth you are about to learn has fascinated even scientists for many years. Space can actually be much louder than you think. It's just that our ears cannot hear those sounds. If space is not completely silent, are there sounds we can't hear? The professor raises his finger into the air. Now, get ready for the real surprise. A moment ago, we learned that sound cannot propagate in space. But then, what were those eerie sounds of a black hole, the hum of Jupiter, or the melody of the sun that millions of people listen to on the internet? Were they all fake? Actually, no. They just weren't what we thought they were. Since there is no air in space, the classic sound waves our ears can hear cannot travel. However, space is not completely empty. Even if they are very sparse, there are gases, electrically charged particles, and plasma between the stars. The sun constantly sends millions of tons of charged particles into space. The powerful magnetic fields of planets pull these particles into an invisible dance. These movements create vibrations. But these are not sounds that our ears can hear directly. A microphone and a radio antenna appear on the screen. Can you hear a radio station with your ear? Of course not. But a radio device captures those invisible signals, decodes them, and plays them through the speaker as music. This is very similar to what NASA does. Spacecraft measure electromagnetic waves and plasma vibrations around planets with special sensors. Scientists then convert this data into frequencies that the human ear can hear. Those eerie space sounds we listen to on the internet are based on real measurements. However, they are versions converted for our ears. For example, Jupiter's giant magnetic field constantly produces radio waves. Different signals are created as charged particles move at Saturn's poles. Inside the Sun, massive vibrations occur. By studying these vibrations, scientists can even obtain information about the Sun's internal structure. In other words, space is not silent. It's just that our ears are not designed to understand the language the universe speaks. The professor turns his telescope to the sky and says his final sentence with a smile. The universe actually never shuts up. Stars, planets, and black holes are constantly sending us signals. We cannot hear them because we are trying to listen with the wrong ears. Perhaps this is the most surprising truth we've learned about space. Silence is sometimes not the absence of sound. It is not having the right tool to hear it. If this video truly surprised you, you can subscribe to my channel.